A special military operation. That is what Russian President Vladimir Putin calls his war in Ukraine, signaling it would be a swift endeavor. But now, after 15 months of war, Russia has lost more soldiers and more equipment than in any other war since World War II. 48 countries have united behind Ukraine, and Ukraine has finally received the modern weaponry needed to clear out every Russian trench from Luhansk to Crimea. It's payback time. It's not a question of whether Putin will lose the war. Putin has already lost. But what does losing mean for the man who never loses, Vladimir Putin? Let's take a closer look. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm political commentator Randall Fink. Vladimir Putin is a strong man. Not that he is physically strong, but in the sense that he rules by the use of force, threats, and fear. Working 15 years for the dreaded Russian security service, the KGB, Putin learned every dark method in the book, and he used it to gain more power, gradually climbing every step of the Russian power ladder until he finally became president in the year 2000. Putin understood how propaganda could shape perceived reality, and so for 23 years he spent enormous resources on turning Russia into a dystopian society where every voice uttering an inconvenient truth has been silenced. For the sake of power, Putin has put a blindfold over the eyes of the Russian people. But the blindfold is wearing thin. Because Vladimir Putin made the grave mistake of invading Ukraine, thereby subjecting his propaganda to the hardest reality check man has ever known: war. Before the war, Putin could tell the Russians that attacking Ukraine was a liberation of the Ukrainian people. But the war revealed Ukrainians are fighting back. Before the war, Putin could tell his people how Russia had developed the Kinzhal hypersonic missiles, which could turn any Western city to dust. But in recent weeks, the war revealed how Putin's Wunderwaffe can easily be shot down by Western defense systems. Before the war, Putin could tell the Russians Russia had the strongest army in the world. But the war revealed Russia only has the second strongest army in Ukraine. One by one, the propaganda narratives fall apart, and so will Putin's empire. To an empire built on lies, truth is like kryptonite. This is why Putin continues the war, not because he thinks he can win, but only because he cannot survive acknowledging the truth. He has lost, economically, politically, militarily, and no amount of propaganda can save him this time. Disinformation simply cannot cover up the consequences of war. Putin tried presenting the lie that the Russian army had few casualties, but it just doesn't work when Russian families are calling their sons on the front line and the phones ring endlessly in the pockets of the dead. But the big question is why? Why would Vladimir Putin attempt the impossible and invade Ukraine, a country the size of France and Belgium combined, with a population of 44 million. Over the years, many who have challenged Putin's views have felt the dire consequences of crossing the dictator. Opposition politicians have been jailed or even killed, and journalists, academics, artists, and everyone else critical of Putin have been silenced. So when Putin wanted to invade, few good people were left to question it. This is the Achilles heel of every modern dictator on the planet. Like kings, they have absolute power, but with no valuable input from experts, every decision they make suffer from their own incompetence. In Putin's mind, Russia is entitled to crush any former Soviet government which does not obey his rule. And for the longest time, we in the West just looked the other way. Through his first 10 years as president, Putin waged a war in Chechnya and ended up taking control of the country. But in the West, we did nothing. In 2008, Vladimir Putin attacked Georgia and occupied 2 regions. Again, we did nothing. Even when Putin invaded Crimea, in 2014, the European Union was more interested in buying Russian energy than upholding the UN Charter and helping Ukraine defend its territorial integrity. Sadly, we did nothing. And who doesn't remember Russia's military intervention in Syria in 2015? Where Putin helped the Assad regime spread death and destruction throughout the country, killing thousands of rebel fighters and civilians. And yet, we did nothing. Even after US President Obama said using chemical weapons would be a red line, and Bashar al-Assad did just that, still we did nothing. This is the West which Vladimir Putin saw, complacent, indolent, and rarely willing to stand up for the values we claim to hold. This is why Ukraine is now paying the price. It's no surprise Putin thought attacking Ukraine would just be business as usual. But the Ukraine invasion was a bridge too far. To the west, Ukraine is not some small unknown country far away. It's a democracy located on EU's doorstep, a potential future NATO member, and a country important for international trade and food security. This time, the West did respond, and since the war began, Ukraine's allies have held 11 meetings at the Ramstein airbase in Germany, coordinating the military aid to Ukraine. And the weapons support has changed the game completely. When Putin was planning his invasion, Russia had an economy 9 times larger than Ukraine's. But let me show you something they never show on Russian state TV. This is the combined economy of 48 countries now allied with Ukraine. This is the economy Putin should have been studying before deciding to invade. Because before the war, the allied countries had a combined GDP 32 times larger than Russia's GDP. This gives you a strong indication Russia would have no chance of winning a long war of attrition once the West decided to back Ukraine. But behind the walls of the Kremlin, Putin didn't see what was coming. No capable person was left to tell him. In the Kremlin circus, only the clowns remained. And so he invaded Ukraine. Summer is coming. 15 months have passed, and we are now entering the final chapter of Putin's disastrous war. In winter, we saw the Russian army slowly but surely running out of resources. Their expensive long-range missile attacks have become fewer as their missile stockpiles are running low, while at the same time, Ukraine's missile defense has been upgraded substantially, with advanced Patriot and NASAMS systems from the Allies. Consequently, in recent missile bombardments, Russia has spent millions of dollars on missiles which have all been shot down. And this is a good example of Western thinking. The Allies have helped Ukraine counter each of Russia's weapons effectively. While Russian soldiers again and again complain how they cannot get tanks to the front line anymore, the modern Western tanks have now arrived in Ukraine. Faster, more reliable, more accurate, and significantly more lethal. Summer is coming, and Ukraine has received modern long-range artillery systems, drone boats, loitering drones, cruise missiles, and many other advanced, game-changing weapons. First, we will see Ukraine shape the battlefield by cutting supply lines and removing the last remaining equipment Russia has left. Then the bloodshed begins. Ukraine will hit Russian positions with every modern weapon in the arsenal, and tens of thousands of Russian soldiers will die. Putin has lost the war. He lost not because he was weak, but because he was a strong man. A tyrant so obsessed with power, he even wanted to subjugate the truth. To real leaders, the truth is a beacon which lights the way to a better tomorrow. But to Putin, the truth is only a nuisance which needs to be hidden. Putin blindfolded the Russian people, and his empire of lies could have lived for decades still. Because propaganda may distract the people in times of peace. But Putin chose war, and there is no escaping reality once the bullets fly. And so, someday soon, Putin too will face reality. It's game over, Mother Russia.